Hi Georgie, hi Ervin. So we are going to speak about the author Ervin Laszlo. You just make a PhD on this dear author that you like very much. And we are going to speak about three things actually. First thing is about the people, the extraordinary people you meet through your journey, through your life. The place also where you have traveled more or less large part of the world. And the key concept who have been in the center of your work. So let's begin by the people. You have been meeting a lot of creative person, from Peter Ustinov to Ilya Prigozhin, through mathematician, musician, artist, through also other authors. So perhaps can you tell us a little about perhaps the 10 key people who seems to you have an impact in your life?
Oh, I don't know exactly 10, but
yes.
They have had people partly who have the initial impact. Many of them are no longer alive.
Yes.
Those who are alive now have come into my life somewhat later. But there are some who have had an intellectual input, some who had a personal input, influence, and some who are on a personal level that I can't share, but were important, obviously. So on the level of the intellectual input, there are the initial influences were, of course, a person whom I never met.
Yes.
In life was Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher whom I studied a great deal. But then I met some of his pupils.
Yes.
At Yale. Henry Margenau and Northrop, Professor Northrop, who were studying with Whitehead. And Whitehead was a colleague of Einstein, is another person, of course, whom I admired very much. And there are a few people, I can't say that there are very many people who have really influenced my thinking, but these they have. And then the people who I've met as a basis of having met them. For example, Margenau introduced me to Van Bertalanffy. Yes. And Bertalanffy introduced me to Ilya Prigozhin. Yes. So there's a whole chain of people who build up sort of the intellectual basis of my thinking. But I always take what I can understand of people's thinking, and then it integrates with my thinking, and then it comes, I try to make a whole, a concept out of it. The concept we can talk about is this new paradigm, a paradigm of which, of course, based on systems, which comes from Bertalanffy, based on the interconnection of things, which comes from Whitehead, based also on nowadays on the interconnection between things, which comes from Prigozhin. And very much, then lately, persons like Stanislav Grof, for example, who has been influential by thinking about the phenomena of consciousness, which is very important. So it's really, there are many elements, they are not separable elements, they all come one into another, even though I have met everybody in person, I haven't worked at the same time as these people, but they all join together in my thinking.
Yes. Georgie, what do you think was, depending of when you was working on the work of Ervin, what appeared to be an important influence for you?
You mean through his work?
Yeah.
For me, his whole theory is a whole. It's amazingly coherent picture he paints about our life and then where we're going, not just as humans, but in context of the cosmic evolution. What I like the most is really the how Ervin explained the evolution. And I
Yes.
think that is really wonderful, because evolution is really not determined. It is possibilistic, really. And I really like that how the evolutionary trend is almost picking the best option possible. And this is for this reason that there's just great diversity, not just within humans. Like, you know, we all look different, and we all act differently. We have different diversity in the animal kingdom, in nature as well. And that's, for me, it is a wonderful concept, really, because it does entail spirituality and science, but doesn't have a very strong religious understanding about it. So it doesn't need to believe in God per se, really. Of course,
Yes.
if one wants to, for sure. But I think this is really important to me in Ervin's philosophy, and also his work, what he has done, and he continues doing on the concept of consciousness, because I think it is that so many theoreticians and philosophers talked about consciousness, but it is still that domain, that frontier that needs to be more discovered, that for us to understand it more, really, because we are aware of it. We are aware of our self-consciousness, really, our reflexive consciousness, but it's almost that there is a tool we don't know how to use. Yeah.
We are going to go more in depth on those key ideas who have been on the heart of the work of Ervin. But let's continue on the periphery, the people, and also the place. So, what are the places who have been important for you?
Well, here we have Georgie, and we have met in Tuscany, actually.
Yes.
She used to live.
Tuscany is very important because you live there.
And she used to live in Florence, not far. And I lived near the coast, the Mediterranean coast. And Georgie discovered that, I was reading my books, and they discovered that I lived there. And she said we should meet. And then she showed up, and we met. And so that became both people and place for us, you know.
Yes, because we can tell a little this story. How long have you been working with Ervin?
Yeah.
10 years? 15 years?
No, it's not that long. Well, 7 years.
7 years.
Well,
yes, so
we
it is near 10 years.
Well, 7 years.
Well, yeah, this life, we have interesting mediums who tell us that we have been together like apprentice and master in different lives, but let's
yes. So
let's just talk about
this
what we know now.
centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. But just a bit about that. I was doing a master's degree in Eastern philosophies, and I read the science and the Akashic field, and I just thought, oh my God, this is amazing. Who wrote this? And then this is Hungarian, and he lives not far from Florence. So I thought I must meet him, and when I went to see him, I thought that I know him. I really know. I felt that I know him for a long time, and then we started to collaborate. I started to work for the Club of Budapest organization, and then it just really went on. And now, just yesterday, I was awarded a PhD at the Sorbonne, and my thesis was centered around Ervin's theory and who and what thought influenced his thinking. So I really reviewed 50 years of his philosophical trajectory and presenting the evolution of complex systems. So I really understand much more in detail as well his thought process. And of course, working with him, I met really interesting people and really good friends of his, one of which is Deepak Chopra.
Yes.
And I met him
which is very well known in USA,
yes,
in American culture,
yes,
which is quite well known also in France, but which is one of the most famous person in American culture right now.
He's a very, very deep spiritual person. I do think that he has he has an influence.
Because he has comes from the Indian culture, which is spontaneously, they are inherently, they are born with this deeper understanding. And so the new science gets incorporated into that. It's never foreign to them. People from the West very often have to learn the thinking from India or from the East. From the East, they are born into that. And then with the new science is coming so close to some of these insights of our connection, of our deeper level of reality, where we all are participants. And the people who are born there, they get it with their mother's milk, as it were.
Yes. So Toscana is a very important place for you. what are some other places who was important? Because you most of your life you travel and you learn. It is quite unique. There are very few persons who have the chance to be traveling all even very young, because as you was a very good musician, you was traveling already young and meeting interesting people, and then you move on a more philosophical path and you work with big agencies, United Nations agency. So you have a kind of diversity. You speak, I think, more or less more than 10 different languages?
A little less, but I always say that I don't speak any, because I don't even have any more a fully native language. I don't live where my native language would be.
Yes, so could you perhaps say one or two words about some other place?
Well,
so Tuscany actually was not
yes.
your birthplace.
No.
It was Budapest, your birthplace.
Yes,
or?
yes. Budapest is certainly one of the places where I had a happy childhood.
Yes.
Except for a period that was for me not unhappy either, but a very difficult period during the end of the Second World War, where Budapest was under seized by the Russian army around it, and there was a lot of street fighting also between the Nazis and the Red Army. And it was difficult to survive, but my family managed to survive. So other than that, I would think it's where I had my first concert at the age of 9.
Yes.
And it was a big event for me. And then I could combine my beginning of my career in music with quite a normal life, going to high school,
yes,
going to play football in the park, or hockey in the winter, and having friends.
Piano. How many hours by day?
2 hours.
2 hours
as
by
a
day.
child, not much more than that. Yes, and with my mother's teaching at home, and then I went to the music academy twice a week for having master classes there. And I got my degree there. Where I was, I think, at that time, I don't know if since then, but at that time I was the youngest one to get their highest degree.
Yeah.
They were very careful not to actually sign the degree, give it to me formally until I finished, until I had my 15th birthday.
Yeah.
Didn't want to give
because
it to a 14-year-old.
It would be too early.
Yes, but actually I passed the last exam. The last examination was a recital that I had, a public recital, which was a month before my 15th birthday. But my diploma is dated 2 days after my 15th birthday. Anyway, those are very happy memories, and I remember that having received this degree, we are talking about degrees now that Georgia has received just now, and to me that recollection of receiving the so-called artist diploma from the Franz Liszt National Academy in Budapest was a period for a few months afterwards, which was a relaxing and almost fulfilled period, I should say. It was not much longer than that, because then we had to leave the country. We had decided with my parents. I come from a wrong family from the point of view of communists, because my father's, on my mother's grandfather's side, and then my father's side, we had a shoe factory. Yes. And therefore we were capitalists. You see.
Yes. You was an entrepreneur. Your family
an entrepreneur. Yes.
was coming from an entrepreneur.
My grandfather was a small shoemaker in the country.
Yes.
He moved as a young man to Budapest, and he was so diligent and so working so hard. He created a small shoe factory, which was very successful.
Yes.
And my father has managed that. But when the Stalinist regime came in, that factory was nationalized, it was just taken over. And we knew that we were not regarded well, because we come from this other strong side, the capitalist side. So there was a music competition in Geneva, for which I could enter as part of the team, the Hungarian team of musicians. And then I was just 15 at that time. And I came with my mother, because I was a minor, she could allow a parent to come with me. So we came, we went out of Hungary, went to Geneva, And when I got as a divided grand prize, I got one of those grand prizes. Then, as a 15-year-old, was very interesting, let's say, for the press.
Yes.
And I got invited to Paris.
Yes.
And that was the next place, which is interesting, where we speak now, in Paris. Then I came as a 15-year-old. I came to Paris and spent a fascinating 6 months in Paris.
Yeah. And so you was playing music.
Yes, I was a concert pianist. I was a child prodigy.
Yes, exactly. And so, what are the musicians who inspire you the most? It was Bach more, or some other musician?
Well, it changes. You know, it's not one. Mozart Mozart and Schubert were permanent.
Ah yes, Mozart and Schubert. So,
yes.
so that was really the
but
focus.
The others, then that it changed very much with the mood. It can
Yes.
change not only from day to day, from hour to hour, how you feel. You know.
Yes.
Sometimes I could feel myself. I say that's a Hungarian expression, but we can use it in the language. Feel yourself into the music. You know. I could feel myself into a Schumann, for example, the Carnival, which all the little pieces, the various characters in a Carnival, you know, I can just imagine each one. In fact, I played that piece in my debut recital in New York, and that captured so much the attention of the critics and the people there, so they made a big to-do about it. But that was, again, one particular period, I was that. And then when I felt more dramatic, more so, then it's Beethoven. Liszt always flamboyant, you know, I mean, playing for the great public and showing what you can do, you know. So it depends. I had various loves. Then later on, it was Bartók who became a permanent addition to my sense of closeness, heart and soul.
So that is between 15 until 25. It was around 10 years where you was a concertist and you was traveling. You was 6 months in Paris and then you moved where?
Well, more than actually several years in Paris.
I'm sorry?
Several years.
Several.
Spent in New York, sorry. Several years in New York. After the first 5-6 months in Paris.
Yes.
Where I was the guest of the family, the Baron Rothschild.
Ah, yes. Okay.
You know, it's a famous place in Avenue Foch. They had a beautiful big house, which is no longer there, but now they built an apartment house in its place. But I could practice there every day. And
they have a beautiful masterpiece in terms of painting. And,
yes, and Madame de Rothschild, Alix de Rothschild, was an amateur painter. She loved painting.
It is one of the most beautiful collection of classical painting.
And there in the garden, they had a studio. And they had all the painting there. She used to be painting. Used to paint there.
She was doing painting.
She was painting while I was, often while she was there. I remember the studio was winter. The studio was not heated except by a kerosene lamp, kerosene kind of a heater, which was very strong smell. But she didn't want to have heating. Always very natural, everything. And so I spent much of my day there. And then in the evening, I would go to the main house, where were the big ceremonial dinners with all the servants serving the dishes, you know, and all that. A very great luxury. Then I went home where my mother stayed, where we stayed together, a tiny little house in a very dark garret somehow in the center of city. A tremendous contrast. But it was all part of the adventures. It was one of nice memories from Paris.
And then you moved where?
To New York.
To New York. New York, because that is the other place. It was in which year? Those year?
1948.
1948.
Yes.
So it is a very important time in New York because actually it is really the time where all the artists actually from Europe have. A part of them have moved to New York, and New York was becoming the center of the art, the center
of the intellectual work.
The intellectual.
That
was Paris before, but then around those years. So you was really moving at a strategic moment.
Well, we moved out, you know, at the time when Europe was still after the war, which was a very bad situation. I remember the sensation of being Le Havre, you know, the port Le Havre, where the big ships were moving to America. This big American ship was called the SS America.
Yeah.
you know. And it was anchored further out in the harbor.
Yes.
And we were taken out by a small boat, and going into the ship was a fantastic experience, because that ship came from another world. America wasn't in the war; they had everything. So I saw there was food there, there was a luxury, the kind of thing that in impoverished Europe I didn't have.
Yes.
First time in my life I had oranges and banana on the ship, you know.
Yes.
Because there was those tropical foods actually were not available.
Yes, because you have go through the war.
Yes, before that.
For years.
Yes.
So the beginning of your life is still marked by this.
But that's right. It was the period of this traumatic events of the Second World War, you know. So anyway, got over to America, and I was just, of course, very excited. Madame de Rothschild and another friend, a baroness, who were sponsoring my debut recital in New York. And of course, I was thinking to go there and then come back to Paris, because you know, why would we stay there? How could we stay there? But then with the recital, they decided, the New York critics decided to make it a big event.
Yes.
And then was.
Yes, that is typically American, you know.
They wanted to make
talent. They
make a show. It was a big show, and then you know, a famous magazine, Life magazine, you know, had a big pictures, many pages, yes. And so I got a contract, and then we stayed in New York. You know, and that's another life start.
Yes,
you know.
exactly. So you was where? In which part of New York?
Well, in Manhattan.
In Manhattan.
Right next to Central Park. Yes.
And so you was playing mostly in New York, or
all over.
To travel
only one concert a year in New York.
Yes.
To make sure that you keep up your reputation.
Yeah.
I was playing 60 to 80 concerts a year.
Yeah. Yes.
All over. The Americans organize this. The agency in New York, you know, has a big. They know how to do mass production. Actually, they set up. I go from one place to another, you know.
So you discover USA, not only New York. You was traveling place to place. Do you have time to look a little around, or not at all?
Not very. Yes, a little bit, because I had a hobby.
Yes.
I had a hobby which was photography.
Ah, yes. Great.
Yes. So I traveled with 2 cameras.
Yeah.
One was a beautiful pre-war Rolleiflex. I was very proud of that. Always was my black and white pictures, and then another camera for color pictures. Yeah. And so I always, before my concert, I used to be asked to take along to the interesting places, and I would make pictures.
Yes.
When I went home to New York, I had a dark room, and I printed it myself, enlarged it. You know,
oh, great! And do you have still those documents?
A few of those pictures in New York. Yes.
Exhibition actually, because that is a very interesting point of view. A musician looking at the American way of life on those sides.
Yes.
And so that you stay in USA doing those concerts for how many years?
Well, let's see, 54, I think, 54. I came back to Europe.
Yes.
Do a tour. I traveled all over Europe. Then I took a little apartment in Switzerland.
Yes.
In Lugano.
Yes.
Lugano has one of the parts of Lugano on next to the lake is called Paradiso.
Yes.
The paradise. And I had an apartment there. In the next house to the famous concert artist, pianist Wilhelm Bach house.
Yes.
He lived there. He was already retired at that time. But then I could get together with him, and I learned a great deal from him as a musician. But I traveled all over. But while I was in Lugano, my favorite pastime was photography. I had a bicycle, and I used to go all around the lake everywhere and taking pictures and meeting people. So it is a this is another magical place that I remember. Yes.
Beautiful place. And it was picture about people or picture about countryside, or it was?
It was two people that I met, you know,
yes.
in Lugano.
You made some portrait of people.
Yes. Even with Georgie, we spent a wonderful had meetings in Lugano.
Yeah.
You know, recorded. There is an interesting project which is called the Choir of the Earth.
Yes.
You know, a choir that once a year in February always goes on the internet, and they sing the Song of the Earth.
Ah, yes.
And they had me conduct the choir, and they recorded that on film, and you can still see that, you know, on the internet. And we did that together, and Georgie helped me set up the whole thing, and become part of this choir, which now has, I think, I don't know, 50,000 choirs or so from all over the world. You know.
Great. That is symbolic of also your way of thinking through your travel and everything. It is the communication, the dialogue between civilization, culture,
yes.
and you are on the...
And the search for the harmony, because this is a beautiful choir piece of a 4-minute choir piece, very harmonious, you know, very beautiful, that other people can come in, and they show on the internet how you can join it and how you can sing along, and then everybody can sing at the same time, and it creates a kind of a new resonance, something, a new frequency. On this earthly noosphere.
Great. So let's return to your story. So that is really a first part of your life, quite long, because it was between 15, even before, because you learned until 15, but you was already a musician. Actually, you began music at the age of 3 or something?
No, well, they tried. My mother tried to teach me when I was 4, but she said to give up because I said that I know everything better, so I was not willing to listen. But then she tried again when she was 5 because she wanted to be a concert pianist. Her problem was that her parents, my grandparents, did not have a musical background, and they did not get her a piano. So by the time she started, it was too late to become a concert pianist. You have to start early for your fingers. Then she had a son. I said, well, my son is going to be a concert pianist.
So that you was musician until which years around?
Well, I was professional musician, I would say, until I got accepted an invitation to go to Yale University on a visiting appointment in '66.
In '66, yes. So that is a big change because you all your life began to change. It happened slowly or it happened?
No, very, very fast.
Fast. Because that is very interesting because that at those times people was used to have a career mostly on the same path. You know, they born somewhere, they had a religion, they have a work, and all their life was predictable.
Sure.
But you are very contemporary because of your life was already, even in those times, most of the life of the people was very linear.
Yes.
You was one of the first contemporary person who have to change, and that is very interesting for young people because we know now that most of the work of tomorrow unknown people will have to change perhaps 3-4 times, and actually you change completely. You have
several times.
Several times. So that is very, very interesting, I think, for the young people because how is it difficult? Did you have a period of questioning or what happens?
I spent 6 years working very much every day on ideas and reading a lot and writing them down 6 years. Even before, it was before any university. I was fully a concert pianist. And I did not talk about it because, you know, when you talk about it, they say, okay, young artist, of course he has these ideas. That's a hobby, you know. And to me it was too serious, so I never mentioned it to anybody.
Yes, that is interesting because that happens a lot of time when you speak with people, they begin something on secret and then this grow.
Well, it came out very much accidentally because I was one day I was having a concert in Holland, in The Hague, and I felt particularly good afterwards because I thought it went very well and I was hoping that it would be well received by the press also. I didn't know that, but in the evening I was a nice reception giving. I was sitting next to a Dutch gentleman whom I didn't know before. And I was feeling expansive, you know, I was willing to speak. And he told me that he's very interested in philosophical questions, and he asked if I ever thought about it. And of course I was working on it day and night, so I talked about it a little bit. And he said, well, could I read anything that you have said? And of course, I had my notes, handwritten notes. In those days, there was not much Xeroxing and copying, but I just had my single handwritten notes. And since the meeting, this dinner banquet was at the restaurant of the hotel where I stayed, you know, in the hotel in Hague, I went upstairs and I showed him. And then I talked to other people and he disappeared. And I was quite worried about it because, you know, it was my only copy. And I said, well, I have to think it out anyway. I just notes, it doesn't matter much. The next morning at breakfast, he came back and he had the notes and he said, we will publish it. And I said, well, who are you? You know? And it turned out he was an editor of a great famous publishing house, which still exists. It's still very famous, called Martinus Nijhoff in Holland. Yeah. And he told me that you have to do a lot of work on it still because they are just notes. You have to make it into a book. And that's it. He showed me what has to be done. Spent another year on this, and then they published it. Yes. Even though the only degree I had was in music from the Music Academy in Budapest. So I had no preparation for this. But then my first book was published, and they became attracted some attention among philosophers. And so then,
and it was a book about what?
It was called, Georgie knows that best now, because she has written her PhD. It starts with that. You know.
Yes, exactly.
Tell us, what was that?
What was the book about?
Yeah, that was his first book. The title was Essential Society.
Yes.
Yes, so within that actually he tackles 3 different areas, anthropology, sociology, obviously, and ontology, really. So even, it's really interesting that the book was written over 40 years ago. And I could find concepts in it which were not as clear to him as they are now. So that what is the consciousness is really what kind of a role it plays in human evolution, that how do we understand the society, how do we understand the evolution of society, how we need to discover the cosmic laws in order to understand what goes on our little planet with regard to evolution and change and fluctuation. So it's a very interesting book. I do have to say that it was a little bit difficult to read because his way of writing is so much more polished. His way of writing is so much easier to understand. But as a young philosopher then, 45 years ago, I think that was tremendous already how much he understood. So the essence
was there.
Oh, absolutely there. Absolutely
and it was right in which language then?
In English.
In English,
yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
So your first writing was in English.
Yes.
Sure.
At that time I lived in America many years. So
yes.
So it's interesting that all the seeds were there.
Yes,
and I think, you know, the plant and the flowers blossomed and are still blossoming now.
So that was in which year?
63.
63.
It was
yes.
published.
So that is interesting because in a way it is a book we introduce already the holistic idea, the cosmic issues. There are already a beginning of change of paradigm, and we are still in some year who was before 68, before the big transformation, the beginning of the big transformation. So it was quite in advance in terms of paradigm compared to what happens in the world at those time. Was still what was happening in terms of thinking in those times was still and in when you was in USA, did you meet or what are the authors who interest you in USA? Because I guess as you was traveling as a musician, then you can have a look in the library and perhaps it is interesting. Do you? Because at those times you have in the West Coast you had already some new paradigm thinker. It was the beginning of it.
Well, you know, while I lived in New York, I was still acting as a concert pianist. I was playing all this time, but I got involved as friends with a group of young people in New York who were all very literary people. They had ambitions to be writers. So I went to the New School for Social Research, which was interesting. It still exists in New York, but at those days, it had a faculty, almost exclusively Europeans who had to flee Europe under the Nazi regime.
Yes,
They went to New York and they were teaching there. They are outstanding people. So I took several courses in writing, and my young friends who themselves were writing, and after we attended the seminars, we would go sit together in Greenwich Village, because the new school for social research is in Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
And we would sit together and discuss it and show each other's writing. So I started writing, but short stories, not philosophy, you see. But the short stories had a philosophical content in a way. I remember writing about evolution, the story of a little snowflake that started to run down, the mountainside became larger and larger, and then it interfered with people's lives, it changes. So as evolution was there already, but as in the form of a short story.
Greenwich Village.
We have to change.
Là, ça
Running
fait
out.
35 minutes, 35 minutes.
Yeah.
I have just 7 minutes left on this card.
So to change.
So I'm going to change it.
Yeah, change
Maybe
Yes.
it's going to be more than 10 minutes.
Maybe you can cut it up in
Camera's rolling.
Okay.
So you was in New York, and you play music all over USA.
And then Europe after
In
that.
Europe, and then in Europe, and then you began to write your thoughts. You began to develop a thinking path, and you published his first book.
Yes.
So that was a slow process on 10 years time.
Well, the first part, the secret part, where I was just writing for myself, was 6 years.
6 years. Yeah.
But then it went fairly fast. In a few years' time, what happened was that this book caught the attention of the chairman of the philosophy department at Yale University.
Yale, yes.
And he said, well, we want you to come and spend a semester or two with us, talking to our students and doing research. And I said, I can't do that. I have all my engagements for concert, So I continued writing, playing my concerts, until one day I was in Bonn in Germany, which was the birthplace of van Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven, yes. And I had to play a concert devoted to the music of Beethoven. Yeah. And at that time I was so full of ideas of my next book, that I forgot even where I was. I was in the middle of playing, but I was thinking about the book, about the ideas. And there was a very difficult part. I was playing the Sonata Beethoven in C major, Opus 53, I remember. And the second movement, it's in the form where you have the theme, and it develops, then the theme comes back, and then it ends. Yeah. So I was playing the theme, I realized that I don't know whether I'm at the beginning or at the end, because it's the same theme. And so if I do the wrong choice, then I either repeat the entire movement or I miss the entire movement, you see. Either case, it's a tragedy, It's absolutely a catastrophe. So I had to take a guess. I decided it's the second time already, and I went on to the third movement, and nobody said anything. There was applause afterwards. I said, my gosh, if I survive this, it can't go on like this. And I then went and sent off a telegram to the chairman of Yale University and said, I accept. Yeah. It can't go on like this, I said. And then it was a few months later, the semester started, and I went over there. And once you start being part of the academic life, you don't have time to do a work of a concert pianist, which is also a profession. Yes, you can't do both. So from that moment on, I had to switch into being an academic. Yes. Which was, to me, a very interesting and important step, but was also very courageous, and I was quite afraid, because I had never went to a university in my life. Yes. So there I had to teach philosophy, and I didn't even attend a university. I didn't even have a high school degree, because when I was 15, I left Hungary, and I got this prize at the Geneva competition. So afterwards says, what do you want with a high school degree? You're never going to go anywhere in an academic life. So there I was, completely on my own, and I said, how do you actually teach a university course? You know? But I prepared for that, and then later on I met a person from a famous French political philosopher called Raymond Poulain.
Yes.
And he was a visiting professor at the same time as I was at Yale University. And he attended some of my seminars, I attended his. And he said, well, it's very important that you are doing, because it's not known in France, particularly the Sorbonne, about this philosopher Whitehead, who had this organic metaphysics where everything is connected, where everything else. And it's not known that would you do a thesis at the Sorbonne?
Yes, so we are in around which years then?
1969.
1969.
Yes.
So it is interesting because this organic way of thinking
Was started. Yes, I had it already. I had it before. I met it.
This holistic point of view.
Yes.
Is very important in your work.
So this is what
that
was.
was also a period where in USA you have the hippie movement and all those. Did you connect with this or not at all at those times? Because it is
Were you a
interesting.
hippie basically?
No, I didn't think so. I was a concert pianist who was interested in photography and in literature.
Yeah, so you was concerned mostly by
that's what I was doing. These were my life. And of course, later on, it was later on that I went back to Europe, and then this story, when I went to Yale, was much later,
Yes,
And that was, then I became an academic. I couldn't be a hippie, I was an academic to teach. I had to teach at university. So. But the interesting was, I said, this connection with the Sorbonne.
On the East Coast,
Yale's at New Haven, near New York, yes.
So it was not the same atmosphere that on the West Coast at the same period?
No.
It was a very serious context.
Well, the academic environment in America, there are islands of in America. Each university, big universities, have their own atmosphere.
Yes.
If you attend those schools as a teacher, student, you hardly ever move out of it.
Yes,
everything around you are those people.
Yes.
Even your daily life everything is around on the campus or just around.
That is very important. A big difference between Europe and USA, I discovered, is the fact that in France, for example, you have the Sorbonne, who are in the middle of the town, and the write a book or make a conference is part of the civil society life.
Yes.
To be intellectual is part of the French life.
Yes.
But in USA it is more island, as you say, where you are in a big university and then you live inside this big university with all your friends, and it is quite different, quite separate than the American way of life.
Well, there are some universities. So you had this beep. That's what your phone?
Okay.
Something beeped. Something beeped.
Very clever.
Je vais le fermer complètement.
Ouais.
Comparing la Sorbonne and American
il faut que je reprenne à partir de quel moment?
Reprends ton observation de la différence entre...
Okay. So, yes, I observe this very interesting fact. It is that in France, intellectual life is in the middle of the city. For example, the Sorbonne is in the middle of Paris, and you have the publisher, you have the intellectual who meet civil society all the time, and be an intellectual is a good position in France. Actually, it is even one of the best positions. That in USA, the intellectual life is more concentrated in big university, and then you live in a little island out of the classical or the just the more the American life?
Well, some of the universities are in the center, but very few, very
Yes.
few. In New York, you have two big universities, Columbia
Yes.
and New York University, you know, and then the City College. These are in Manhattan, but they also have a little bit of their area,
Oh, yes,
their
even
nucleus.
in New York.
Even in New York, even though in the middle.
From the American.
It's not part of the life. And if you're outside, and other universities like Yale and Harvard and Princeton, they are out in the country. And of course, Harvard is a little bit more because Boston has a bit this intellectual
Yes,
environment.
Boston is a little as
But
Paris.
Connecticut doesn't have, and New Jersey not at all. I think,
Yeah.
you know, I spent a semester at Princeton, and always had a feeling that you are in an island.
Yes, yes.
You know, when you go outside, it's New Jersey. Inside, it's not New Jersey.
Yeah.
It's Princeton.
So you was living this kind of life, which was a life of an academic in Yale.
Yes.
So that was for how many years?
Well, that was one academic year, but then when I met this French professor, he told me that I should present, he would offer to suggest that I should present a thesis at the Sorbonne.
In the Sorbonne,
I said, well,
which is the same school where you present your own thesis. And Sorbonne also is very famous all over the world because it is one of the very first university in the world. So
yes,
that was
yes, indeed.
some interesting thing
Yes.
for you.
Yeah.
What was your image of the Sorbonne from an American point of view?
Well, you know, I never actually attended the Sorbonne,
Yes, yes.
you know, because I was teaching in America by
Yes,
that time,
yeah.
all this time. But I visited in order to be inscribed and to present this, to make the thesis, and then I had to come to defend the thesis,
Yes, yes.
just like Georgie had these days, you know.
In French or in English?
In French, in French. I was very courageous because I wrote this thesis also in French.
Yeah, which was new.
Which fairly was new. I learned French, you know, when I was a 15, 16-year-old. I stayed here, so I speak quite fluently, but I did not have any practice in writing. So I wrote it, and I had a French person read through it to make sure that the expressions, orthograph is all right, you know, but I had to defend it in French. You know. So of course I was a bit nervous, like everybody is, I think, before before presenting a defense.
I'm just living this yesterday.
This traumatic experience that can be very happy at the end when they say, okay, now we have approved your degree. And with Georgie, they approved the highest level of this degree, which is very honorable. It's honorable with the congratulations of the jury, which is the highest level. In my day, it was a different kind of a degree. It was called the state doctorate. The university doctors and the state doctorate.
And you was able actually to do a state doctorate, even if you have not the previous
Well,
degree.
what they did was a very clever and nice thing. They give me, as an honorary basis, the university doctorate. So I have the university doctorate as a basis out of which I can do the state doctorate. But I have not attended any. This was done on the basis of my published work.
And so your thesis then was about what?
On Whitehead. Organic, which was my first love and my major interest. This idea of we called it a metaphysic for Whitehead, but it was the idea of in the world where everything is so connected with every other thing, so that you don't have separation. What one thing is, it depends on its relationships to other things.
Yes, that is the beginning of the systemic approach, of
Yes.
the systemic view of the world.
That's right.
Where relation is more important than object, and even the object dissolves in the relation. So, did you read this thesis?
No, it's not accessible actually.
Yes.
Nobody could find. I was researching to find it, but it's we don't know where it is really. Because it was
did you have still a
40
copy?
years ago.
Not even Ervin?
I have a copy at home. Yes, I think so. But I'm not. I think it's I first wrote it in English and I rewrote it in French. I think it's the English copy I have. I don't have the French.
Interesting. So then you was really in the intellectual world. And did you continue a little to play piano during this time, or did you stop completely?
I could not do on a professional level,
Yes,
because
yeah.
that means working. That
Yes,
means,
yeah.
you know, there was this famous saying by Paderewski, the great artist, pianist, previous century.
Mm.
He said, if I don't practice for one day, I notice it. If I don't practice for 2 days, then the public notices it. Yeah.
But actually, I hear you play music. We put you in a trap, and you say, "Now, Ervin, you have to play music." And I was very lucky because I hear you, and I was.
You did.
It was so beautiful, so
I'm-
good. So it is
I'm
not
very-
completely true. what
I'm
you
very
say.
reluctant to play because I have to prepare.
Yeah,
You know, it's not just your mind. Yes, your fingers have to play,
yeah,
and that you have to work.
yeah.
You know.
So you was completely in the intellectual world. So what was your next step? Where did you went then?
Where did I go? I played a lot of concerts in Europe
No, but I mean in terms of
of intellectual
yes,
development.
writings. And
Ah.
we was on the Sorbonne when you
Yes.
defend your thesis. So that was in
No,
which
at
round,
that
which
at
year?
that point, I think I was working on my next book, which Georgie knows best. I think the System, Structure, and Experience,
Yes.
which is epistemological. How do we know?
Yeah.
Is our consciousness in contact with the world? I was working on this. I think it's published in those same years.
Mm.
And then I prepared, Georgie can tell you more about it now. She knows more of my background work than I do at this point. I was preparing my major work, which was modestly called The Introduction to Systems Philosophy.
Yes,
But that I
is
consider
very
the first
important
major
because
work.
It is really the moment where, with all your roots, you began to develop a systemic approach of the world, which was in the around 70s.
It was published in 72, right,
70.
Madame?
Yes.
So that is interesting because I think the first work on systemic approach was in the 55, isn't it?
Yes.
I think the first writing about even the term of systemic is 55, isn't it?
Thereabouts, yes, by Van Bertalanffy, 2 people actually,
Yeah.
both of them from Vienna.
Yes,
One of them was Ludwig van Bertalanffy, the other was Paul Weiss.
yes,
They're both biologists
yes.
who took the idea that an organism is a unity that evolves, that has relationships to other unities, and they're all integrated. So they use the term system
Systemic
for
approach.
that.
And actually, if you look at the roots of the idea, you can find it in different places, and not only in the work of Sri Aurobindo, isn't it?
Yes,
Even at the beginning of the century, but he was not saying systemic. He was speaking about, I think, spherical way of thinking or thinking
integral.
on a different
There was
point
also a
of view.
lot of integral thinking was there. And that's Teilhard de Chardin,
Yeah,
for
Teilhard de
example, is
Chardin,
very, very interesting because he says the whole system made up of all the individual minds is the noosphere,
Yes.
and that is a development. So basically, there are 2 etaps, 2 levels of this. One, to show that systems are very much related to one another.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
coherent with one another. They're isomorphic, as Van
Yes.
Bertalanffy would say.
Or
The
holomorphic.
The
or-
same dynamic, you know. The same dynamic appears in the system, whether it's a system of cells or a system of societies.
Yeah,
You know.
that was a big step.
A big step
Discover
forward, yeah.
That you can have some law
Yeah,
of the
apply.
systems.
That's why he called it a general system theory.
Mm.
He talked about not the system is general, but the theory is general. You have the same theory applies to different levels of systems. But then the next step was to discover how the systems in interaction evolve, how
Yes.
they can move from one level to another, you know, how the world is built up from level of physical-chemical systems to cells, to macro cells, to organisms, then to ecologies and cultures. There's a sequential evolution. And here the basic concepts were developed by Ilya Prigozhin.
Yes, so then you meet Ilya Prigozhin around those years.
Yes, I did in America. Yes.
That is very important because Ilya Prigozhin was really one of the first thinker in this field, and this meeting must have been very important for you then.
Was very important. He had, with his theory, he even has an equation, a famous Brussellator, because from Brussels associated, it's called the Brussellator. He shows how systems, how elements of systems, in terms of element A, element B, element C, etc., when they interact, they self-generate a new element.
Yes.
All of a sudden something emerges. And it works on the level of chemistry. You can identify different chemical elements, you put them together, and the system evolves itself.
Yes, was completely new because we was at those time in a context where the dominance paradigm was mechanistic.
Mechanistic
So
and materialist, very
to
strictly.
begin to study a more systemic approach was completely new.
And evolution, I think bringing in evolution. At that time, even physicists were reluctant to admit evolution in the world, because that means bringing in time.
Yes.
And they said at the time, I shouldn't say at the time, at those ages, in those years, they tried to find a theory that is independent of time.
Yes, yes.
That would be good at any time, describes the basic relationships. So time is not a basic factor. And Prigozhin was the first one in physics who made time an element, a factor in his equations. Without time, they don't work, So that means systems evolve.
Yes. So this idea of evolution then began to be very, very important.
Yes.
And for years, because even now you are working still on this idea of evolution. So there are a first step, which is a change of paradigm, coming from a mechanist point of view to a more organic, systemic point of view. And then through the systemic approach, discovering the different level of complexity, then the evolution. And what are the different with your way of thinking and the way of thinking of Prigozhin? Because they are a little different, because when you take Prigozhin, we take Ervin Laszlo, when you take, for example, another important thinker, French thinker, Edgar Morin, they are still little different. You have a discussion between you,
yes.
between more or less transcendental effect or immanent effect.
No, I had an occasion to spend 1 hour on Italian television in the framework of the famous Festival of the Two Worlds in Spoleto.
Yes.
In Spoleto, every year they had this famous festival, and both Prigozhin and I were invited on this one section which deals with science.
Yes,
And we spent 1 hour discussing. The main point of the discussion was, which we have never resolved between ourselves, was whether the point, what Prigozhin calls the point of bifurcation or point of transformation, whether it's from a previous
level of complexity to other complexity.
Yes, a complete transformation.
Which seems very abstract, but actually it is a very interesting question, because it is really how the biosphere began, the noosphere, how before the biosphere the minerals evolved to life, and how life evolved to more evolved.
That's right. The different levels of evolution. The question that came up: what influences this?
Yes, that is interesting.
What
question.
is that create? And we agreed that it can be very small effects in a system that reaches the point of bifurcation, which is a point of instability. Then the system is not sustainable, like our world today is not sustainable. At that point, you can have very small changes inside the system, which create the next step for a bifurcation. The system transforms. Okay, so Prigozhin says that this is independent of the environment of the system, independent of the past of the system. Only the system itself generates this bifurcation, which by some process, more or less chance process, then one of those bifurcations takes over the dynamic of the system, becomes the new system, And I said that in terms of my thinking in Whitehead and interconnection, there cannot be any point in the evolution of a system which is independent of its environment.
Yes, yes.
Because the system is all the time connected with others, you know. So we never agreed whether this